5 minutes after the movers left, three HOA board members stormed onto my private pier, demanding I tear it down. Their president, Serafina, gave me a 72-hour ultimatum, threatening legal action. She was standing on my dock, pointing at boats in my harbor, completely unaware that every single thing she could see around her belonged to me. The look on her face when she realized her power play just backfired spectacularly was absolutely priceless. As I tried to keep my voice calm, I introduced myself. I'm Dash Kensington. This is my property. I just closed 3 weeks ago. What standards are you referring to? Serafina didn't even blink. This primitive fishing setup is incompatible with our community's vision. You have 72 hours to dismantle it, or we will pursue legal remedies. Her tone suggested she was used to issuing orders that were swiftly obeyed. An ultimatum on my own pier on my first day of peace after leaving the most stressful career imaginable. 6 months ago, I was running a $47 million cryptocurrency operation. I was 34 and utterly burnt out, staring at screens 18 hours a day. I sold everything for one reason, to find something real. And I thought I'd found it. This cabin was modest, but it came with a private pier and a ring of 30 mysterious boat keys the previous owner didn't understand. But as Serafina threatened me, I realized the salt air wasn't the only thing I'd inherited. I'd bought a headache and it was wearing nautical-themed leisure wear. She gestured across the harbor at a passing fishing trawler. See? Your operation encourages this disruptive traffic. The captain of the large boat waved at me. Not a casual hello, but a respectful nod. That's when I knew the HOA wasn't just wrong. They were about to be embarrassingly, catastrophically wrong. My name is Dash Kensington, but everyone calls me Dash. If you told me 6 months ago that I'd be living in a small waterfront cabin fighting off entitled suburbanites, I would have laughed. 6 months ago, I ran a cryptocurrency mining operation that I built from nothing into something worth $47 million. When Bitcoin hit its peak, I sold everything: servers, facilities, contracts. I was 34 and completely burnt out from the digital world, staring at screens 18 hours a day. I wanted something real, something tangible, something that connected me to the physical world again. That's when I found this listing for a waterfront cabin. It wasn't fancy, just $900,000 for what looked like a simple retreat property. What caught my eye wasn't the cabin itself, but a small footnote buried in the property description about existing maritime commercial agreements and something called riparian rights that came with the deed. Most people would have glossed over that legal jargon, but my brain was wired differently after years of reading complex cryptocurrency contracts. When something seems too technical to matter, that's when it usually matters most. I contacted the listing agent and asked for a meeting with the seller, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peton. She was settling her late husband's estate and seemed overwhelmed by the paperwork she didn't understand. The cabin itself was modest, maybe 1,200 square feet, but it sat on prime waterfront real estate with a private pier extending nearly 200 feet into the harbor. Mrs. Peton handed me a massive ring of boat keys, at least 30 of various sizes, and said, "These might be important, but I never figured out what they all open." Her husband had always been down at the docks talking to captains and signing papers, but she stayed focused on the house and garden. She seemed almost embarrassed by her lack of knowledge about the maritime side of the property. As we walked down to the pier, I noticed details that didn't quite fit a simple residential property. There were commercial-grade cleats for mooring large vessels, industrial electrical hookups, and what looked like fuel lines running underground toward the water. The pier itself was built to handle significant weight and weather, far more robust than anything a recreational boat owner would need. Across the harbor, commercial crab fishing boats were heading out, luxury yacht charters were preparing for weekend excursions, and there was a constant flow of maritime traffic suggesting serious business operations. When I asked Mrs. Peton about this activity, she shrugged and said her husband always told her the water business was complicated and she should leave it to the men who understood such things. That afternoon, I made an offer and she accepted immediately. She seemed relieved to have someone take the whole complicated mess off her hands. I was excited about the possibility of owning something tangible after years of dealing with digital assets. The closing went smoothly, and I arranged to move in the following month, planning to spend some time figuring out exactly what I'd bought before making any major decisions about the future. 3 weeks later, the moving truck arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. I'd hired professional movers because, frankly, after the cryptocurrency windfall, I could afford to make life easier. My belongings weren't extensive since I'd been living minimally. The movers were efficient and friendly, and by noon, they were loading up to head back. I was standing on my new pier, breathing in the salt air and feeling genuinely peaceful for the first time in years when I noticed 3 people marching toward my property. Their body language was unmistakably aggressive. The woman leading the group looked to be in her mid-40s, perfectly dressed in expensive maritime-themed clothing, but she seemed more comfortable in boardrooms than around actual boats. She didn't bother with introductions. "I'm Serafina Westmont, president of the Coastal Haven Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your immediate compliance with community maritime standards." Her tone was condescending, as if talking to a child caught breaking rules. Behind her were 2 other board members, a nervous-looking man who kept checking his phone and a woman about Serafina's age who was taking photos of my pier with professional intensity. They positioned themselves like they owned the space, spreading out across the dock in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. I tried to keep my voice level and polite. "I'm Dash Kensington. This is my property. I just closed on it 3 weeks ago. I'm not sure what standards you're referring to, but I'm happy to discuss any legitimate concerns you might have." I figured this was some kind of welcome wagon situation that had gotten off on the wrong foot. Serafina's response made it clear this wasn't going to be friendly. "This primitive fishing setup is completely incompatible with our community's vision for waterfront excellence." She gestured dismissively at my small fishing boat, which I'd planned to use for some recreational crab trapping, and at the pier itself, which, though weathered, was structurally sound and functional. The other woman finished taking her photos and joined the conversation with an authoritative tone that matched Serafina's energy. "These commercial fishing implements violate our aesthetic guidelines for residential waterfront properties. The presence of industrial-grade equipment creates an unsightly disruption to the carefully maintained ambience our community has worked years to establish." I looked around at what they were calling commercial implements, trying to understand what they were seeing that I wasn't. My setup consisted of a 24-foot fishing boat I'd bought used, some basic crab traps, and the existing pier infrastructure. Nothing was particularly industrial or commercial. Certainly nothing should have triggered this level of concern from a homeowners association. What really confused me was their reference to community standards and aesthetic guidelines. During the purchase, nobody had mentioned HOA restrictions. My attorney had specifically confirmed that the property wasn't subject to any homeowners association covenants. I'd been careful about that because I'd heard enough horror stories about HA overreach to want to avoid those complications. That's when the nervous man spoke up for the first time, consulting a legal document printed on official letterhead. According to Section 4.7 of our Community Maritime Regulations, any waterfront property owner engaged in commercial fishing activities must obtain prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee and demonstrate compliance with established aesthetic standards. The situation was starting to feel surreal. I'd been on the property for less than 4 hours, hadn't engaged in any commercial fishing activities, and yet I was being lectured about regulations that I was pretty sure didn't legally apply. Rather than escalating, I decided to try a diplomatic approach. "Look, I think there might be some confusion about what activities I'm planning and what authority your HOA has over this property. I bought this place specifically because it wasn't subject to HOA restrictions. I have no intention of operating any kind of commercial fishing business. This is just personal recreational equipment for my own use." Serafina's expression shifted from condescending to openly hostile. "Personal recreation that disrupts community standards is still a violation of our neighborhood character preservation requirements. You have 72 hours to dismantle this pier and remove all fishing-related equipment, or will be forced to pursue legal remedies." The ultimatum hit me like a physical blow, not because I was intimidated by their threats, but because of the sheer audacity of someone demanding I tear down infrastructure on my own property based on regulations that probably didn't even apply. I'd just spent $900,000 on this place, and now some self-appointed neighborhood authority figure was trying to dictate what I could and couldn't do with it. As if the situation wasn't absurd enough, that's when I heard the deep horn blast of a large commercial vessel passing through the harbor. The sound echoed across the water. I turned to see a massive fishing boat, probably 80 feet long, heading toward the open ocean. Its name was painted on the hull, Sea Titan. As it passed my pier, the captain gave a respectful wave. Not a casual hello, but a nod of recognition. Serafina noticed and used it to reinforce her point about my supposed violation. See exactly what I'm talking about. Your little hobby operation is encouraging this kind of disruptive maritime traffic right through our residential area. These commercial vessels have no business operating so close to our luxury waterfront community. Her assumption that I had any control over commercial maritime traffic in a public harbor was fascinating. There was something else in her tone, a territorial possessiveness, as if she viewed the entire waterfront as her personal domain rather than a shared community resource. The woman with the camera finished documenting what she considered evidence of my violations and rejoined the conversation with renewed authority. We'll be filing a formal complaint with the county zoning department on Monday morning, and we're prepared to pursue injunctive relief if you don't voluntarily comply. The legal costs alone should convince you cooperation is in your best interests. That threat crystallized something for me about the dynamic I was dealing with. These weren't concerned neighbors trying to preserve community standards. These were people accustomed to getting their way through intimidation and legal pressure, counting on their targets being too overwhelmed or financially constrained to fight back. But they'd picked the wrong target this time. After years of navigating complex cryptocurrency regulations and dealing with government agencies, a homeowners association's threats didn't carry much weight. More importantly, I had the financial resources to fight back and the curiosity to understand exactly what kind of game they were playing. As the 3 board members prepared to leave my property, Serafina delivered what she clearly intended as a final intimidating message. This community has standards, Mr. Kensington, and we protect those standards vigorously. I suggest you use the next 72 hours wisely to consider whether you really want to test our resolve. After they left, I spent the rest of the day exploring the property more thoroughly and thinking about the encounter. Something about their behavior didn't add up, particularly their intense focus on maritime activities in what was obviously an active harbor community. If commercial fishing operations were such a problem for the neighborhood, why had the community been developed in an area with existing maritime infrastructure? That evening, I called my brother, Caspian, a maritime lawyer in Seattle who specialized in waterfront property disputes. When I described the confrontation and the threats about commercial fishing violations, I could hear him chuckling on the other end of the line. That sounds like classic HA overreach, but there might be more to this than you realize. Waterfront properties often come with complex rights and responsibilities that previous owners didn't understand or document properly. Before you do anything else, you need to get a complete title search and find out exactly what maritime rights come with your property. He recommended a colleague named Victoria Sterling, a sharp attorney who handled maritime property disputes throughout the Pacific Northwest. He also suggested that I document everything about my interactions with the HOA and start researching the actual legal status of my property rather than relying on what anyone had told me during the purchase. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Not because I was worried about the HA's threats, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The encounter felt performative, like they were following a script they'd used before with other property owners. Their confidence suggested they knew something I didn't, and that knowledge gap made me uncomfortable. The next morning, I decided to explore the harbor and talk to other boat owners to get a sense of the local maritime community. What I discovered was fascinating and more complex than I'd expected. The harbor supported a diverse mix of operations: commercial fishing, charter services, recreational boating, and maritime tourism. Everyone I talked to seemed to know something about my property that I didn't. When I introduced myself to the captain of a charter fishing boat, his reaction was immediate recognition rather than the polite introduction I expected. "You're the new owner of the Peton place. We've been wondering who was going to take over the operation now that Harold's gone." He seemed to assume I knew what operation he was referring to. When I asked for clarification, he looked confused. The Marina operations, the commercial licenses, the fuel concessions. Harold ran a significant business out of that property for 30 years. Didn't the real estate agent explain any of that when you bought the place? His questions made it clear that there was a whole side to my property purchase I'd completely missed. Mrs. Peton either didn't understand or hadn't thought to mention it. I spent the rest of the morning talking to marina workers, boat owners, and longtime harbor residents. A picture began to emerge that was radically different from what I'd understood. According to multiple sources, Harold Peton hadn't just owned a waterfront cabin with a private pier. He operated a small but successful marina business providing services to commercial fishing boats, fuel concessions for recreational boaters, and various licenses for maritime commerce in the harbor. The more I learned, the more I realized that those 30 boat keys weren't random pieces of hardware. They were access keys to various aspects of a marina operation I'd accidentally inherited along with the property. If that was true, then Serafina's threats about commercial fishing violations weren't just inappropriate, they were potentially interfering with legitimate business operations that predated her HOA by decades. By Monday morning, I had a list of questions that needed answers, and I was beginning to suspect my confrontation with the Coastal Haven HOA was about to become more complicated than anyone anticipated. The first thing I needed to do was contact Victoria Sterling and get a complete legal analysis of exactly what I'd bought. The second thing was to figure out why Serafina Westmont was so determined to shut down maritime activities the community had apparently coexisted with for 30 years. But as I prepared to make those calls, I couldn't shake the feeling there was something personal about Serafina's hostility. Her reaction to the commercial fishing captain's wave was too intense and territorial for someone simply concerned about community aesthetics. Whatever drove her crusade against my property, I suspected it had more to do with power and control than with preserving neighborhood character. The phone rang at 7:30 a.m., interrupting my coffee and planning session. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Mr. Kensington, this is Serafina Westmont. I'm calling to inform you we've decided to expedite our enforcement timeline due to additional violations we observed over the weekend. You now have 24 hours to begin dismantling your pier, or we'll be filing for emergency injunctive relief." The escalation caught me off guard, not because I was intimidated, but because I couldn't figure out what additional violations she was talking about. I'd been careful not to do anything they might consider problematic. Her accusation was so far from reality, it almost made me laugh. The conversations I'd had with marina workers and boat captains were obviously research, not business meetings. I decided to test my theory about her motivations by pushing back a little harder. "Serafina, I think you're misunderstanding both my activities and your authority. I've done some research since our last conversation, and I'm not convinced your HOA has any legitimate jurisdiction over my property or my activities. Before this goes further, we should clarify exactly what legal authority you're claiming." The silence that followed was telling. When she responded, her voice shifted from confident authority to barely controlled anger. "Mr. Kensington, you clearly don't understand how serious this is or how determined we are to protect our community's interests. I suggest you consult with qualified legal counsel before you make any decisions you'll regret." After she hung up, I sat thinking about the conversation and what it revealed. Serafina's escalation from 72 hours to 24 hours wasn't based on any new information or legitimate violations. It was a pressure tactic designed to force me into compliance before I had time to research my rights or consult attorneys. That realization crystallized my decision about how to handle the situation. Instead of trying to negotiate or compromise with someone operating in bad faith, I was going to find out exactly what my legal position was and then respond from a position of strength. I called Victoria Sterling's office and explained the situation to her paralegal, emphasizing the urgency created by Serafina's abbreviated timeline. Victoria called back within 2 hours and agreed to take the case, but she warned me that maritime property law was complex and we might uncover complications I wasn't expecting. Our first step, she explained, would be a comprehensive title search and analysis of all maritime rights associated with my property. The second step would be researching the legal foundation of the HOA's claimed authority over waterfront activities. The third step would be determining what kind of business operations, if any, I'd inherited along with the property. Victoria's questions about my purchase process revealed just how much important information had been glossed over or omitted entirely during the transaction. Had anyone explained the commercial licenses associated with the property? Did I have documentation of existing business relationships or contracts? Was I aware of any ongoing revenue streams from Marina operations? The answer to all of those questions was no. That meant I was potentially sitting on business assets worth significantly more than the $900,000 I'd paid. But it also meant Serafina's attempts to shut down maritime activities could be interfering with legitimate commercial operations she had no authority to restrict. By Wednesday afternoon, Victoria had preliminary results from her research and asked me to come to her office for a meeting that would change everything about how I understood my situation. The tone of her voice suggested that what she'd discovered was significant. As I drove to her office, I reflected on the irony. I'd bought the waterfront property as a simple retreat from the complexity of cryptocurrency business, looking for something peaceful. Instead, I'd stumbled into a maritime property dispute that was turning out to be far more complex and potentially valuable than anything I dealt with in the digital world. But I also felt a sense of anticipation about whatever Victoria had discovered. Serafina's aggressive tactics suggested she was either very confident about her legal position or very worried about something I might find out. Either way, I was about to learn which one it was, and I had a feeling the answer was going to surprise everyone involved. Victoria's office overlooked Elliott Bay, and as I sat across from her mahogany desk, commercial vessels moved through the shipping lanes in the distance. She had 3 thick folders spread out in front of her, each labeled with different aspects of my property research. Her expression carried the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd uncovered something significant. What I'm about to tell you is going to fundamentally change how you understand your property purchase and your position in this dispute with the HOA. She opened the first folder and pulled out a stack of legal documents that looked considerably more official than anything I'd seen during my original closing. You didn't just buy a waterfront cabin with a private pier. You bought a controlling interest in Blackwater Maritime Operations, a commercial marina business that's been operating continuously since 1987. The words hit me like a physical impact. According to the documentation, Harold Peton hadn't just owned my property. He'd used it as the headquarters for a marina operation that controlled 43 commercial boat slips, fuel concessions for the entire harbor, and exclusive licensing agreements with the Coast Guard for training operations. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. Victoria pulled out a harbor map showing property boundaries I'd never seen before. My small waterfront parcel was highlighted in red and connected to an intricate network of maritime infrastructure extending throughout the harbor. The Coastal Haven residential development where Serafina lived and served as HOA president was built on land that Harold Peton had leased to developers in 1995. The implications were staggering. Serafina wasn't just threatening to interfere with my property rights. She was threatening to disrupt business operations on land I technically owned. Every house in her HOA community existed because Harold had agreed to lease waterfront acreage. Now that lease agreement had transferred to me along with everything else. Victoria continued explaining the legal complexities while I tried to process the magnitude of what I'd accidentally purchased. The marina operations generated approximately $2.3 million in annual revenue through various streams, including slip rentals, fuel sales, charter boat partnerships, and Coast Guard training contracts. Harold had been running a small maritime empire. Mrs. Peton inherited something she didn't understand and couldn't manage. When she sold me the property for $900,000, she unknowingly transferred business assets worth potentially 20 times that amount. The massive ring of boat keys wasn't random hardware. It was access to every aspect of a marina operation that employed 37 people and served as the economic foundation for the entire harbor community. But Victoria saved the biggest bombshell for last. She pulled out a folder marked legal violations and showed me documentation proving that Serafina's actions over the past week had already cost the Marina business significant money through disrupted operations. Two charter fishing companies had canceled contracts because they'd heard about HOA interference. A Coast Guard training exercise had been postponed due to uncertainty about facility access. 3 commercial fishing vessels had moved their operations to a competitor to avoid complications. The financial damages from Serafina's interference totaled $87,000 so far, and they were accumulating daily as word spread through the maritime community about the dispute. Victoria explained that maritime commerce law provided strong protections for established business operations and that Serafina's threats constituted illegal interference with interstate commerce since many of the affected businesses operated across state lines. I left Victoria's office feeling like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. My simple property purchase had transformed me into a maritime business owner with legal claims against the very people who'd been threatening me. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings as Victoria helped me understand the full scope of what I'd inherited and developed a strategy for dealing with Serafina's continued harassment. Meanwhile, Serafina escalated her campaign against my property to include what she called community safety concerns. She organized a petition among HOA members claiming unauthorized commercial maritime activities posed risks to residential water quality and neighborhood security. She contacted local media outlets with a story about how commercial fishing operations were threatening the character of an upscale waterfront community. Her media strategy backfired spectacularly when a reporter from the Harbor Business Journal started investigating her claims and discovered the actual ownership structure of the Marina operations. The resulting article was headlined, "HOA President Unknowingly Battles Her Own Landlord Over Maritime Rights," and included quotes from longtime harbor workers who described Harold's operation as a model of environmental responsibility and community partnership. Serafina wasn't backing down despite the negative publicity. On Friday afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting at the community center, promising members she had definitive legal ammunition to resolve the commercial fishing problem once and for all. She'd hired what she described as a top maritime attorney from a downtown firm and was confident community pressure combined with legal threats would force me to abandon my supposedly illegal business activities. I decided to attend the meeting, not to defend myself against her accusations, but to finally reveal the truth about what she was actually fighting. Victoria agreed to accompany me, and we prepared a presentation that would demonstrate exactly how wrong Serafina had been. The Coastal Haven Community Center was packed when we arrived, with nearly every HOA member in attendance and several reporters. Serafina positioned herself at the front with her hired attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept consulting his notes. She opened the meeting with a dramatic presentation about how commercial fishing operations were destroying the community's carefully maintained waterfront ambience. She showed photographs of my modest fishing boat and basic equipment, describing them as evidence of unauthorized industrial activity that violated both HOA covenants and county zoning regulations. Her hired attorney then delivered what was clearly intended to be the knockout punch, explaining how maritime commerce law prohibited residential waterfront properties from engaging in commercial fishing without proper licensing and environmental clearances. He emphasized the serious financial penalties for violations and suggested immediate legal action was necessary to protect the community's interests. The audience appeared convinced by their presentation, and I could see hostile looks directed toward me. That's when Victoria stood up and asked to address the meeting. Serafina looked annoyed, but allowed a brief response before proceeding to vote on legal action. Victoria walked to the front of the room with her briefcase. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Victoria Sterling, and I'm a maritime property attorney representing Mr. Kensington. Before you vote on any legal action, you should understand exactly what situation you're dealing with and who you're actually threatening to sue." She opened her briefcase and pulled out the harbor map showing the true ownership boundaries of the Marina operations. As she unfolded the large document and attached it to the easel, confusion spread through the audience. "This is a current property survey of the harbor area," The red sections indicate property owned by Blackwater Maritime Operations, which Mr. Kensington acquired along with his residential purchase. She used a laser pointer to highlight the various sections of Marina property, including the fuel depot, the commercial slips, and the Coast Guard training facilities. But the most interesting part of this map is the yellow section. Victoria continued, moving her laser pointer to highlight the entire HOA community, including Serafina's house and the community center. This entire residential area exists on land that's leased from Blackwater Maritime Operations under a 99-year agreement signed in 1995. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as people began to understand the implications. Serafina's face went pale, and her attorney flipped through his notes as if trying to find some reference to the information Victoria was presenting. Victoria proceeded with documentation of the Marina's commercial operations, including the Coast Guard contracts, charter fishing partnerships, and fuel concessions that generated millions of dollars in annual revenue. She explained how Harold built a successful business while maintaining excellent relationships with the residential community, and how that balance had been disrupted only by Serafina's recent interference. The most devastating part of her presentation was the documentation of financial damages caused by Serafina's actions. She displayed contracts that had been canceled, training exercises postponed, and commercial relationships damaged by the uncertainty created by her threats. Mrs. Westmont's interference with legitimate maritime commerce has already cost Mr. Kensington's operation $87,000 in documented losses, with additional damages accumulating daily. Under federal maritime commerce law, this constitutes a legal restraint of trade, and the responsible parties can be held personally liable for all resulting financial harm. The audience was silent now, and people exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to understand how badly they'd been misled. Serafina looked like she wanted to disappear, but Victoria wasn't finished. There's one more aspect you should understand. She pulled out the lease agreement that governed the residential development and held it up. Under the terms of this lease, the residential community pays annual fees to the Marina operation for waterfront access and harbor usage rights. Those fees are collected through your HOA assessments and forwarded to the Marina owner. That meant every person in the room had been indirectly paying money to support the very business operations Serafina had been trying to shut down. Serafina finally tried to salvage the situation. This is obviously some kind of fabrication designed to intimidate us into backing down. I demand to see original documents and independent verification of these outrageous claims. Victoria smiled and gestured toward the back of the room where I noticed several people I'd met during my weekend conversations at the harbor. Captain Morrison from the Sea Titan charter operation, Elena Rodriguez from the fuel depot, and James Wright from the Coast Guard training facility stood up as witnesses. Captain Morrison addressed the room. I've been working with Harold's operation since 1991, and everything this attorney just told you is correct. Mr. Kensington is the new owner of the marina that employs most of the boat captains in this harbor and provides the fuel for every recreational vessel you operate. Elena confirmed the financial relationships between the marina and the residential community, explaining how the fuel depot had been providing discounted services to HOA members for decades as part of the original lease agreement. James described the Coast Guard training contracts and their importance to maritime safety throughout the region. By the time the witnesses finished, it was clear Serafina had not only been wrong, but had been interfering with business operations that directly benefited her community. The mood shifted from hostility toward me to anger toward her. She looked like she wanted to vanish, but the final blow came when Victoria outlined the personal liability implications. Under maritime commerce law, individuals who knowingly interfere with legitimate business operations can be held personally responsible for all resulting damages, including lost profits, canceled contracts, and legal expenses. Mrs. Westmont, you're facing potential personal liability of over $200,000 for the damages your interference has caused to Mr. Kensington's business operations. Additionally, your actions may have violated the lease agreement that allows this residential community to exist, potentially giving Mr. Kensington grounds to terminate the entire development agreement. The threat of losing their homes and community turned the entire HOA membership against Serafina. People who had supported her enforcement actions an hour earlier now demanded her resignation and asked how to repair the relationship with the Marina operations. Her hired attorney began packing his materials, clearly unwilling to continue representing someone who'd hired him based on false information. I finally stood up and addressed the room, trying to strike a balance between asserting my rights and maintaining the positive relationship Harold had built with the residential community. I never intended to disrupt the partnership between the marina and your neighborhood. Harold built something special here, and I want to continue that tradition of cooperation and mutual benefit. But I also made it clear that Serafina's behavior had been unacceptable and there would be consequences for the damage she'd caused. The marina employed nearly 40 people and served as an economic anchor for the entire harbor community. Her attempts to shut down legitimate business activities had hurt real families and threatened livelihoods. Victoria negotiated a settlement agreement on the spot, with Serafina agreeing to pay $65,000 in damages for the business disruption she'd caused and resigning immediately from her position as HOA president. The community also agreed to formalize their partnership with the marina through updated agreements that would prevent future misunderstandings about authority and responsibilities. 3 weeks later, Serafina's house went up for sale with a reduced price sign. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Margaret Chin who understood maritime history, worked with me to organize a community appreciation event celebrating 35 years of successful partnership between the residential development and the marina operations. Standing on my pier that evening, watching families enjoy boat rides and fishing lessons provided by my marina staff, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that first confrontation. I'd come to the waterfront looking for simplicity and peace. Instead, I discovered I was the owner of a thriving maritime business that connected me to a community in ways I'd never expected. The irony wasn't lost on me that Serafina's attempts to force me out of the neighborhood had actually helped me discover the true value of what I'd purchased and my role in supporting the local economy. Her hostile confrontation led directly to my understanding of assets worth millions of dollars and my position as a significant employer and community partner. Perhaps the most satisfying part of the resolution was knowing Harold's legacy was secure and that the marina operation he'd built would continue serving the harbor community for decades. Mrs. Peton called me a few weeks after the settlement to thank me for honoring her husband's work and maintaining the positive relationships he'd cultivated. The cryptocurrency millions that enabled me to buy the property turned out to be small change compared to the maritime business I'd inherited. More importantly, I'd found something digital assets could never provide: a connection to a physical community and a sense of purpose that went beyond personal wealth accumulation. Every morning when I walked down to the pier, I was reminded that sometimes the best revenge against people who try to diminish you isn't getting even. It's discovering you were already more powerful than they realized, and their attempts to tear you down only revealed their ignorance and insecurity. Serafina had stormed onto my property, demanding that I tear down my pier, never knowing she was standing on land I owned and threatening business operations that employed her neighbors and supported her community. The woman who tried to make me feel small and unwelcome learned she was actually the outsider, fighting against forces much larger and more established than her petty ambitions. 2 months after Serafina's departure, I was sitting in what had been Harold's office, a cluttered room above the marina's main building that I'd been slowly organizing. Among the filing cabinets and maritime charts, I discovered additional documentation revealing just how extensive Harold's operation had been. There were contracts with fishing cooperatives from 3 different states, environmental partnership agreements with marine conservation groups, and correspondence with federal agencies about potential expansion of the Coast Guard training facilities. But the most intriguing discovery was a folder marked Future Development, containing Harold's handwritten notes about plans he'd never had a chance to implement. He'd been negotiating with a luxury yacht manufacturer about establishing a service facility in the harbor. He'd identified potential sites for expanding the marina to accommodate larger vessels and additional commercial operations. Reading through Harold's vision, I realized my accidental inheritance came with opportunities far beyond what I'd understood during my confrontation with Serafina. The infrastructure was already in place to support significant expansion, and the relationships Harold had built with regulatory agencies would make permitting new facilities much easier than starting from scratch. I called Caspian to discuss the expansion possibilities, and his enthusiasm was immediate. You're sitting on a gold mine most people spend decades trying to build. The combination of established commercial relationships, prime waterfront real estate, and existing regulatory approvals is worth significantly more than the current revenue numbers suggest. He recommended bringing in a maritime business consultant to evaluate the expansion potential and develop a strategic plan for growing the operation while maintaining its community partnerships. Within a week, I met Rebecca Torres, a former Coast Guard officer turned maritime business developer with experience helping family operations modernize and expand. Rebecca's assessment confirmed what I'd suspected. The current facilities were operating at about 60% capacity, which meant immediate opportunities for increasing revenue without major infrastructure investments. More importantly, the harbor's location and existing relationships positioned it perfectly for emerging trends in maritime commerce, including ecotourism, sustainable fishing practices, and luxury vessel services. Her recommendation was a phased expansion that would double the marina's capacity over 3 years while adding complementary services like boat repair, marine education programs, and specialty charter operations. The projected return on investment justified using cryptocurrency profits to fund the development, and the timeline allowed for careful integration with community interests. But before committing to expansion, I wanted to ensure the residential community remained supportive. Margaret Chin and I organized a series of neighborhood meetings where Rebecca presented the proposals and solicited feedback from HOA members about their concerns and priorities. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Partly because people had come to appreciate the economic benefits the marina provided, and partly because they understood that responsible growth was preferable to stagnation or potential sale to less community-minded operators. Several residents volunteered to serve on an advisory committee that would provide ongoing input about expansion decisions and community impact. One of the most enthusiastic supporters was Eleanor Patterson, a retired marine biologist who moved to Coastal Haven specifically because of its proximity to active maritime operations. She proposed partnering with local schools to develop educational programs teaching children about marine ecosystems, sustainable fishing practices, and maritime careers. The educational component became a cornerstone of our expansion planning, with dedicated facilities for classroom instruction, hands-on learning experiences, and internship programs connecting young people with maritime career opportunities. The Coast Guard training facility expressed immediate interest in collaborating on safety education and youth development programs. 3 months into the expansion planning process, I received a call that brought the story full circle. Mrs. Peton's nephew, David Peton, contacted me about visiting the marina to see how Harold's operation was developing under new ownership. He explained he was a marine engineer working in Alaska and had always regretted not being involved in his uncle's business during Harold's lifetime. David's visit turned into a week-long consultation that revealed additional aspects of Harold's operation I'd never discovered. He'd worked summers at the marina during college and understood the technical systems and supplier relationships in ways that weren't documented in Harold's files. More importantly, he shared stories about Harold's vision for the marina that helped me understand the values and principles that had guided 35 years of successful operation. Harold always said the marina business was really about connecting people to the water and helping them understand their relationship with the marine environment, David explained as we walked through the facilities. He believed commercial success and environmental stewardship weren't competing priorities. They were complementary aspects of sustainable maritime business. That philosophy became the guiding principle for our expansion efforts, with every new facility designed to demonstrate best practices in environmental protection while providing economic opportunities for the local community. We installed solar panels to power the fuel depot, implemented advanced water filtration systems to prevent harbor contamination, and established partnerships with marine research institutions to monitor the health of local ecosystems. The transformation of the marina over the following year was remarkable, not just in terms of physical improvements and increased business activity, but in the strengthening of relationships between the maritime operation and the residential community. What started as Serafina's attempt to create conflict had evolved into a model of cooperation that attracted attention from urban planning experts and maritime development consultants. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the marina's expansion, highlighting the community partnership approach and its success in balancing economic growth with environmental responsibility. The article brought inquiries from other waterfront communities facing similar challenges about integrating commercial maritime operations with residential development. Rebecca suggested we formalize our community partnership model into a consulting service that could help other harbors develop sustainable growth strategies. The idea of exporting Harold's vision to benefit other maritime communities was appealing, and it represented a natural evolution of the business beyond its original geographic boundaries. By the end of my first year as Marina owner, the operation employed 62 people, generated over $4 million in annual revenue, and had become a regional model for sustainable maritime development. The Coastal Haven residential community not only embraced their partnership with the marina, but became advocates for its expansion and its benefits to the broader harbor area. Standing on the observation deck of the new Marine Education Center, watching children from 3 different school districts participate in hands-on learning experiences about marine biology and sustainable fishing practices, I reflected on how dramatically my understanding of success had evolved since my cryptocurrency days. The digital millions provided the financial foundation for purchasing the property, but the real wealth came from discovering my connection to a community that valued long-term relationships over short-term profits. Harold's legacy wasn't just a successful business operation. It was a demonstration that economic activity could strengthen rather than undermine the social and environmental fabric of a community. Serafina's attempt to force me out had inadvertently led to my discovery of assets and opportunities worth far more than anything I'd achieved in the digital world. More importantly, her hostility motivated me to understand and embrace Harold's vision for community partnership in ways that might never have happened if the transition had been smooth and conflict-free. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who tried to diminish my presence became the catalyst for my becoming one of the community's most significant contributors. Her fear of commercial maritime activities led directly to the expansion and improvement of those operations, creating benefits for everyone she claimed to be protecting. Years later, as I watched the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold and orange, with commercial vessels returning from successful fishing runs and charter boats, bringing happy families back to shore, I realized that finding my place in this waterfront community gave me something more valuable than all the cryptocurrency profits I'd earned. It gave me a sense of belonging no one could take away and a business that connected me to the rhythms of the sea and the lives of people who understood what it meant to work with their hands and build something lasting. The gate keys that started this adventure now opened doors to opportunities I'd never imagined. And every day brought new proof that Harold's 35-year investment in community partnership was the foundation for something much bigger than any of us had realized. As more time passed, the waterfront community became a shining example of what could be achieved when people put aside small-minded disputes and focused on shared goals. The marina flourished, incorporating eco-friendly practices and educational initiatives that drew visitors from across the region. School children who once only glimpsed the harbor from afar now had opportunities to learn about marine biology firsthand, sparking curiosity and inspiring future careers in maritime industries. Residents felt a deeper sense of pride in their neighborhood, knowing that their waterfront wasn't just a scenic backdrop, but a living, breathing center of commerce and conservation. They volunteered at community cleanup events, attended marina-hosted workshops, and even invested in collaborative projects that link their homes with the water's edge through boardwalks and gardens. For me, the journey from burned-out cryptocurrency entrepreneur to engaged marina owner and community leader was transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. I discovered that wealth isn't measured solely by digital accounts or ledger balances, but by the positive impact we can have on the world around us. The peace I sought wasn't found in solitude, but in collaboration and shared purpose. Looking back, I can almost laugh at how close I came to missing out on this life. Had I not been pushed by Serafina's misguided aggression, I might never have uncovered the true scope of Harold's legacy or recognized the extraordinary potential I had inherited. Her attempt to wield power through threats and exclusion ended up catalyzing a series of events that strengthened community bonds and expanded economic opportunities for everyone involved. And now, whenever I take a moment to breathe in the salt air, watch the fishing boats cut through the waves, or hear the laughter of children learning about the sea, I understand that there is no greater satisfaction than knowing you're part of something bigger than yourself, something built on trust, cooperation, and respect for the world we share.